This voice snippet is called Staying Fresh at Work. Okay. The reason why I moved a lot of these voice snippets over from Instagram to YouTube is because it starts getting intricate. One thing I realized is that when someone is being targeted, oftentimes the people that are planning it, the persons that are staging these type of plans, they work on multiple angles. I mentioned a few posts ago, maybe about almost a year ago now, that I had multiple arrows being pointed at me. So whatever targeting was happening, it was happening at work, in the neighborhood, at home, amongst my contacts and friends, or people I thought were friends, and then my family. So as these multiple arrows were being pointed at me from different directions, it's like I had to remain calm, but I used all the distractions happening at the same time to now see how everything came together like pieces of a puzzle. I posted a picture of Baby Yoda as an example to show how many arrows were being pointed. And the whole point of being able to make sense of what's going on around you is by being calm and standing still. And this is what I did. I started working on an occasional basis at a local and well-known organic grocery store delivery company. I started working there during the winter of 2020. And why I'm being specific is that there was a kind of strategy in place at that workplace. And at first when I got hired, I thought it was a place I'd be safe and things would be calm. But whoever led this type of project seemed to have a timeline. Whatever was happening was starting to happen every 3 to 4 months, and it was a consistent, noticeable pattern. I mentioned when I started these voice snippets that things were brewing in my life everywhere, and it's not normal for this type of thing to happen to me. Like I said before, I'm really chill. I do have spontaneous moments in life. I love to travel. I like to go out. But the types of things that were happening were definitely things I thought were planned by people who were trying to create chaos. At first, I wasn't scared, but I was concerned. At the beginning of lockdown, it was a very simple time. So because it was a simple time, life had slowed down. I found an essentials gig after being laid off at Billy Bishop Airport. I was excited that my first project was completed right before COVID, so October 2019. During the year, all was peaceful. Then by late 2020, I stopped getting shifts. So let me backtrack a little. I'd always been working with job agencies in the hospitality side of things. So when I wasn't working at my day job, I would work on weekends or days off to supplement my income. Then, late 2020, I stopped getting shifts from the agency. The agency started getting a little weird with shifts, so it was a very seamless, straightforward process. There's a few things that were happening with the agency. What I noticed was that people who were part of this group through the house music community also held day jobs in specific companies or organizations. So what they would do is actually hire me through these agencies that I was working for. And it happened 2 or 3 times, specifically with people who were enlisted to bully or stalk me. So I thought it was very interesting when I got booked for those jobs and I went to those locations that whoever was the supervisor enlisted to bully me was actually the managing supervisor at those jobs. I'll get into that in a little more detail because it's very organized in the city. I was no stranger to interruptions and pauses in my daily life. So from year to year, this repeating pattern of smooth sailing and then instability was something I got used to. So I was always prepared when things would go smooth and then get dysfunctional. It was by design, and it was definitely not the way my life was supposed to be. So the bookings stopped, and then whoever was working at the agencies, they stopped answering my calls. And whenever the companies would try to figure out why I wasn't being booked for shifts, they would actually call directly to the agency and no one would pick up the phone. Within me, I understood that there was a setup in place when it came to someone on the other end manipulating when I was supposed to work and how often I was supposed to work. But whoever was enlisted to actually book me and give me shifts and give me work would never know what was going on. So at first they were there to help me, and then eventually their attitude towards me would change. To me, it seemed like a setup, to be honest. The supervisor was shocked, so instead of waiting and wondering why and how she wasn't able to book me for these shifts, the supervisor decided to hire me directly. And so for those of you who have heard me talk about spirituality and the universe or the creator, it's moments like these where I always smile because I know that someone always has my back when there's someone or something, a force or an authority trying to block my opportunities or trying to block my ability to live calmly and smoothly. So after being blocked from someone at the agency from being able to work, the supervisor at the organization hired me direct. So I ended up working at this place for 2.5 years. I was so relieved because I started thinking, this can't be another job loss. I kept wondering who it was that was trying to slow my ability down or slow my potential or ability to work and earn a living down. There was something wrong. I got hired at this place finally in early 2021. Things seemed fine, but in winter 2021, one morning, so around this time, so January 2021, I hopped on the bus to head to work. An old guy living in this neighborhood hopped on the same bus with me. I had known this guy to be the person who was hired to take out the trash in this area. I think he's like kind of like a super, and he actually does the exact same thing. So pulling out the recyclables and trash, he does that for my building and a few buildings in this neighborhood. I had known this guy as Jim. I thought that maybe because I'd seen him so many times, I thought that maybe he was possibly retired and that he was hired as a maintenance man for a few of the apartments in the area, like I said. Because I'd been already living in this neighborhood for 2 years, I'd seen some of the same people around the area. I used to see Jim riding around in his car. He would drive to the gas station. I've spotted him driving around the area, and I've spotted him driving in 2 different cars. So I was very familiar with seeing him around garbage day near my home, and I also had seen him driving around the neighborhood. What I didn't expect is that he would be hopping on the same bus with me one cold morning on my way to work at this job. I thought it was odd because I had seen his car parked in the driveway. He hopped on the bus, and because I've been at this point followed around by people for 1 or 2 years, to see him on the bus, my guard was up. Instead of me getting off at my actual stop to my actual workplace, I decided to get off 2 to 3 stops ahead of work, and then I walked on foot to my job. But within a few weeks of this man, Jim, following me to work on the bus, things started to seem really weird on the job. One thing I've noticed that was happening consistently with my stepmom, and that had happened with so many people, that made me think that there wasn't a problem going on behind the scenes, is that a lot of these people would ignore me when they would see me in person. So, for example, like my stepmom never really had anything direct to say to me. Same thing with this Jim guy. He never really used to say anything to me. So when I would see him moving a different way and, hopping on the bus to kind of see where I work, I wondered, what's the problem? So yeah, people would ignore me, so I never really saw a problem with it. And so I would see him around a few times a week in the neighborhood, and I would just simply say hello. But I would keep a distance because I didn't know if he's someone I could trust or if he's someone I could talk to. So I refrained from speaking to him. Same thing with my stepmother. She would ignore me a lot of the times, so I would call her to keep in touch just to say hello, and she would never act like anything's wrong, but then sometimes she would be agitated with me. So I started seeing like a noticeable difference in a lot of the behaviors of people around me. While I was working at this place, I just noticed some changes that were happening with my family. So that's like mid 2021. I began to realize that there was a kind of isolation technique that was going on, and I started to get used to the isolation. And because I'd been through this for a few years now, I was very familiar with how people used to move. So I just started accepting the isolation. So it started with people in the house music scene. It started happening in the neighborhood, and then it started happening at work. I just let it happen. I realized that if things needed to change, I had to accept what was happening around me, but I remained observant. I decided to let everything happen, and I just started taking a lot of notes. I stopped answering calls to phone numbers I didn't recognize, and I also stopped answering my stepmother's calls because she always used to call me exactly when I would leave work. And she would actually ask me when I think I'd be home, and she'd want exact times. So this is where work started coming into play with whatever was happening in my personal life. At work, I started noticing supervisors who wouldn't say good morning when I would try to speak to them. So if I saw them first, I would say good morning and they wouldn't respond. But even though they would never respond, they started following me around the workplace. Another supervisor who generally works in the office would have his phone out and he would watch me wherever I would go on the premises. He would even follow me into like the storage units at work. One day I pulled out my battery pack, which I used to charge my phone, and I put the battery pack on the table and I stacked my phone on top of the battery pack. And one of my supervisors approached me and she asked me why I had 2 cell phones. The way she asked me why I had two cell phones was as if she was looking for something specific. Any of you guys know the joke that people make about people having two cell phones? Read between the lines with the cell phones. One day I asked to work in another section of the workplace, just so I can get a feel for how the other departments work. I went to that workspace to go and work. I asked for directions how to work the exact job. And while I was doing the work, the supervisor or team lead in that area of the workplace got angry, and she told me that I'm working too slow. So I ignored what she was saying and I continued to work and pick up the pace. And then out of the blue, she told me that I was being watched on cameras. And she pointed at the cameras and where they were located in the workspace. And I asked her, well, why are they watching me? And she said, they're watching you to see how you're working because maybe they're going to see that you're working slow. And I thought, that's weird. And I said, how do you know where the cameras are located in the warehouse? And she didn't answer. She reported me to the supervisor. And after this specific incident, I ended up being moved to another section of the workplace, and my manager never addressed what had transpired between me and the coworker. My stepmother kept calling me while I was at work, even during my shift, demanding to find out exactly where I was and what time I was leaving work. And what was so strange is there was no basis for her clocking my movements. So it's not like we had any arrangements to meet, or it's not like I was gonna see her or anything. She just kept asking me, where am I and exactly what location and what time. This pattern continued for about a year, and in addition to being followed around near my neighborhood, followed around at work, let me just include some of the chronology of the things that happened. The neighbor was digging through the trash. That was weird. The toilet was flooded by the pest control people. My landlord kept visiting and saying that he had to look at stuff in the apartment. And the sex chat messaging was being spammed on my phone. So while I'm telling you what's happening to me at work, all these different scenarios are also happening at the same time. So as I'm explaining this, imagine how chaotic all of those scenarios happening one after the other within the span of 9 or 10 months. That was a lot, and I still remained calm because I wanted to make sure that what I was seeing was something that was designed strategically by someone. I don't know, but someone. By now, anyone who's tuned into these, you might be wondering, what's the point of me telling you about how all this shit went down? The life of a person surrounded by illusion, controllers, manipulators, feels like a repetitive hamster wheel. As I was writing this book, more and more of these deep situations were being uncovered. As I kept going to work, supervisors still wouldn't say hello, but would sit nearby to listen to me speak to my coworkers during lunch hour, so I continued to watch them while they were watching me. By early 2022, I knew something strange had permeated into my job. Since 2012, I used to ignore all the strange behaviors that I witnessed. I began to focus more on myself to stay grounded because most of the occurrences were designed to gain a reaction and verbal exchange from me. The company that I was working at had announced to the staff that they were going to be moving to another location. Because of everything that was happening, I knew I wanted to stay close to home instead of far away. COVID have changed my focus and mindset. I started looking for jobs in my field. I had injured my elbow on the job. I got a job offer and handed in my 2 weeks notice. So by June of 2022. I never told anyone that I was leaving the job. On my final shift, I was still being followed around in the workplace. I went to my supervisor's office and to say goodbye. I had handed in my resignation letter the night before because I just noticed that things were getting out of hand at the workplace. What she told me shocked me. Upon my departure, she admitted that the company at that location was being investigated by the feds. I'm not sure why she told me this, but she said that the CRA was cracking down on companies that worked with or used job agencies. She mentioned that many agencies had affiliations with the cartel. Now, when I heard this word cartel, I was very shocked because imagine living in West End Toronto, minding your business, going to work, keeping to yourself, being a good citizen, and you hear from your supervisor that they're being investigated because of their connection with the cartel. Shock. I was so shocked. One, that she was disclosing this information. Two, that she was admitting to me that there was an investigation going on at the job. She said that the employees that were coming to work at the job site through the agencies were also being watched. I don't know why she told me all this info, but I was relieved that it was my last day. I left at the right time. I didn't know if anything was going on with anyone at the job or if there were any criminals working at the job. But I knew that I didn't like how I felt while I was working there. I did not know that this is how people who are being targeted are treated on the job. But what I did know is that things were getting weirder and weirder, and I was relieved to walk away from that place. While I'm sharing this information with you, I want you to understand that, again, I don't know how connected all of this information is. I can't begin to tell you if there's anyone connected to the abuser, the cliques, any kind of underground crime or any kind of police activity. I don't know. What I do know is that everything that was happening is the manipulation on steroids. So it just kept going and going and going. Please tune in for my next chapter because it gets wilder. Thank you.